Hello and welcome back to app development. All right, so today we are going to actually start making our first of many different games that are going to use a lot of the different elements of MIT App Inventor and lead us to write a lot of different code than what we've seen so far. So the first game that we make is basically going to be a very simple whack-a-mole game. So there's going to be a mole that moves around the screen. If you click on the mole, you get a point. If you keep clicking on it, you keep getting points. If you get to a score of 5, the mole then starts moving faster. All right, so then it gets harder and harder. If you get up to 10, the game ends and you win. And every time you miss the mole, you lose a point. And if the score goes below 5, it gets slow again. And eventually, if I was really bad and got all the way down to -10 because I wasn't very good at the game, all right, it would give me a message that I lost, and the mole would stop moving altogether to signify that the game is over. And then I have this reset button that would reset my score to 0 and start the mole moving again. All right, so that's what the finished product is going to look like. So much like a lot of the other apps, what we're going to do is we're going to do the first part together. We're going to get some of the basics done as a group, and that'll give me a chance to introduce some of the new concepts. And then once we have those taken care of, you'll continue and finish the rest of it on your own, and there'll be a lab document that sort of walks you through everything. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start a new project. And you can call it whatever you want, groundhog, mole, whack-a-mole, whatever you want to call it, it's fine. That's up to you. I'm just going to call mine groundhog. Oh, it already exists, so I'm going to call it groundhog 2 because I know that doesn't exist. All right, and I'm going to get my blank app here. All right, so once you've got this up, I'm just going to walk you through some of the design elements that we're going to need for this app. Okay, so the very first thing, and this is going to be true of almost every single game that we make, is we're going to need a canvas. So again, the canvas is in drawing and animation. It's the second one down, and we're going to drag that over to our app. All right. Now the canvas, I want to take up most of the screen, but not all of the screen because I'm going to need some room at the bottom. So I'm going to set the width to fill parent, and I'm going to set the height to 80%. All right. So that'll take up a good portion of the screen, but it will leave me some space down at the bottom for my labels and my buttons and so on and so forth. Now, you might have noticed on the finished product, there was sort of like a grassy background. There are 2 picture files that are included with the lab. As always, if you want to find your own pictures, you're welcome to, but those are 2 pictures that you can use. So I'm going to upload those files to my project. So I'm going to go to Media, Upload File, choose File. They're probably going to be in your Downloads folder. All right, so if you go to your Downloads folder, they should be right there, assuming you've downloaded them. And I'm just going to upload them both right now. So I'm going to upload the grass file. And then I'm going to upload the mole file. And again, if you want to find your own pictures, you're welcome to do that. These are just the 2 that I'm sort of giving you to start with. All right. So grass.jpg is what I'm going to use as my background. So in Canvas, there's one option in the properties window called background image. So now that I've uploaded those, I can click on this, change it to grass.jpg, hit OK, and that'll give me the grassy background that you saw before. All right. I'm also going to add a horizontal arrangement underneath my canvas. So I'm going to drag that in right there. I'm going to leave the height at automatic, but I'm going to change the width to fill parent like we usually do. And then inside of that horizontal arrangement, I'm going to start with a label. All right, and I'm going to change that label so that the text inside of it just says score, a colon, a space, and then the number 0. All right, so it says score, colon, space 0. And then if you want, you can play around with that a little bit. If you want it to be a little bigger, you could change the font size. If you want it to be bolded, you could do that. I leave that up to you, just how you want it to look. This right here is size 25, but again, that's up to you. Then you're going to drag in a second label, all right? And this is the label that we're actually going to use to display the winning message or the losing message. So what we're going to do is I'm still going to change the font size to 25 so that it matches the other one. I'm still going to change the font to bold so that it matches the other one. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to this bottom property, which is visible, and I'm going to uncheck the box. All right, so that's going to make it invisible for right now. All right, because we only want that message to show up when they win or lose. So by unchecking that box, it's still there, it exists, and I can write code for it, but it won't actually show up until I turn it on inside of my program. And then last but not least, I'm going to add a button. All right, so I've got to add a button there, and I'm just going to change the text of this button to say reset. All right, so those are all the visual items that we're adding to our display. The other thing that we're going to add is down in the sensors menu. All right, and we're going to add what's called the clock. All right, now the clock is going to let us have code repeat over and over again. All right, we're going to set a timer on this clock. All right, so first of all, let's just drag it over. It's not going to show up in the app, but it's going to show up down below under non-visible components. And if we look at the properties, we have a box checked for timer always fires, and then timer enabled. So timer always fires just means that it's going to keep firing. It's going to keep counting over and over and over again. And timer enabled just means that it's turned on. Now this timer interval is in milliseconds. So 1,000 milliseconds means 1 second. So what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to write code that repeats itself every second my app is open. And if I change this to 2,000, it would repeat the code every 2 seconds. And if I changed it to 500, it would repeat the code every half a second. But it's going to allow me to have code repeat over and over and over again. And this is how I'm going to have the mole move. If you think back to the demo that I did there, the mole just kept moving. I'm going to use this clock to make the mole move over and over and over again, because the clock is going to repeat every second, and every second I'm going to just have that mole continue to move so that it keeps jumping around the screen. All right, so this is everything you need on the design side. So now we can go over to the blocks window. All right, so we're going to go over to the blocks window. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create what are called procedures. All right. Sometimes you'll also hear them called functions in other programming languages, but MIT App Inventor calls them procedures. And again, you're going to see them in other programming languages called procedures too. So procedures, functions, they can kind of be used interchangeably. Now, what procedures do is they allow us to be more efficient with our code writing. So if we know that we're going to need to use the same code over and over and over again in our program, instead of rewriting that code, we create what's called a procedure. And that's going to let us use that code again and again and again without having to rewrite the code. All right, so I'm going to grab one of these and drag it in here. All right, now this procedure needs a name because by default, it's just called procedure. And we want to give it a name, so we're going to call it move mole. Now you might be saying to yourself, the mole, like, what's the mole? We didn't add it yet. You're absolutely right. We didn't add it yet. I forgot to add it. So let's go back to the design window for a second and we'll actually add the mole. So the mole, if we go to drawing and animation, is what's called an image sprite. All right, that's going to be an object that can move around our canvas. So we're going to drag this in, and it doesn't really matter where you drag it in, just anywhere on the canvas is fine. All right, image sprite 1 is going to be added over to here. And then the only property we have to change for right now is the picture. And instead of it being none, we're just going to choose mole.png, that other file we uploaded. And then you're going to see that the mole shows up on the canvas. So again, sorry about forgetting that, but we just needed the image sprite here, which is going to give us the mole, which is then going to move around the canvas. All right, so now that we've got that, let's go back to the blocks. Now there's going to be lots of different times the mole has to move. So instead of rewriting that code over and over again, we're going to put it inside of this procedure. And again, I changed the name of my procedure to move mole. So what's actually going to go inside of this procedure? All right, I'm going to go down to the image sprite on the left-hand side, and I'm going to get the dark green block that says set image sprite.x. And then I'm going to go in and get the other dark green block that says set image sprite.y. Right? So we talked about this in the Paint app, but the canvas is basically a giant XY grid. So this is 0, 0, and then as you go to the right, X gets bigger. As you go down, Y gets bigger. So we're going to move this picture around the screen by changing its XY coordinates. All right, and we're going to do it multiple times, which again is why we're putting it in the procedure. All right, so to move it, we're going to go to our math menu. We're going to get random integer, and we're going to plug this into both the X and the Y. Now, we don't just want it to be 1 to 100. All right, first of all, we're going to change the ones to zeros. All right, we're changing it to 0 because the top left corner is 0, 0. And then the 100s we can just throw away. All right, so that 100s we can just get rid of because we're not going to use those at all. Now, what we're going to use instead is we're going to use the width of the canvas. All right, so we're going to use the width of the canvas and say basically you can go from 0 to the width of the canvas, or you can go from 0 to the height of the canvas. And we'll see how to do that in a second. But instead of putting in hard code numbers, we're going to use the width of the canvas and the height of the canvas. That way, if somebody has a different size phone, it's still going to work correctly. Now, something to know about sprites and moving things on the canvas is that when it moves this sprite, and let me go back to this right here, when it moves this sprite and I specify an XY coordinate, it's moving the top left corner. So I have to be careful because if I move the top left corner all the way to the edge of my canvas, it's actually going to make the picture sort of disappear because most of the picture will be off the canvas and only like the very corner will be on it. Same thing when we're going down. If we're not careful, we can put the top left corner on the canvas and the rest of it will disappear. So when we set it up, we're actually going to have to do an offset to make sure that the whole picture stays on. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. All right. So to do this right here, we're going to go and we're going to get a subtraction block. And this subtraction block is for our offset. So we're going to take this subtraction block and we're going to put it in both of these. So both of these are going to have a subtraction block in it. The front of the subtraction is going to be the canvas width. So if I click on the canvas, there's a light green block that says canvas width. And this is going to be the width. And then down here, which is the Y, instead of using width, I'm going to use the height. All right, so I'm going to use the height of this because it's the Y. I'm going to use the width up here because it's the X. Now my offset is basically just based on the size of my sprite. So I'm going to subtract the width of my sprite, and I'm going to subtract the height of my sprite. All right, and that just makes it so that it will never end up off the screen. It's just a little offset so that that left corner can't push the object off the screen. So just by subtracting a little bit from the width, we ensure that it won't end up off the edge of the screen. By subtracting a little bit from the height, we make sure that it won't end up off the bottom of the screen. All right, and then it's never going to end up off the top or the left because we're starting at 0, 0, and we're not allowing negative numbers there. All right, so this is now a function, and we can use this function anytime we want to move the mole. All right, so to move the mole, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to clock. We're going to get when clock.timer. And this is the event that just happens every second. I said the clock was going to go off every second because we set the interval to 1000. So any code I put in here is going to happen repeatedly once per second. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my procedure menu, and you're going to see I now have this new block called call move mole. And if I put this in here, this will automatically call this procedure and run both of these lines of code. So this one block now runs both of these lines of code. And if I go to my emulator, you're going to see that the mole has now started moving around the screen. All right. So I've got this one function that's taking care of that. And now anytime I need to move the mole for a different reason, I can just reuse this and I don't have to write the code again and again and again and again. All right. So next thing that we're going to do together is show you how to keep score. All right. So to keep score, we're trying to remember something. All right. So if we need to remember something in a program, that means we need a variable. So here I have my initialized global variable, and I'm going to call it score. All right. And I'm going to set it to 0 because the score is 0 at the start. Now, we are going to have to update the score again and again and again and again. So this is another good time to make a procedure. Again, anytime you're doing something over and over in your program, it's a good idea to make a procedure for it. So I'm going to get this top procedure block. All right, and I'm going to call this one update score. And I'm going to update the score by changing that text label. All right, so my very first text label is where I have the score, so that's label 1. I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to get the dark green set text label. And then what I'm going to set it to is I'm going to go into the text here, and I'm going to get this join block. All right, and this join block lets me connect together lots of different text and put them into like one sort of sentence or one block of text. So I'm going to plug this join variable in. And what I'm going to do is in the top, I'm going to retype the word score with a colon and then a space. So that's just the word score, colon, space, which if you remember, that's exactly what I typed in on my design view. And then instead of typing in the 0, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my score variable. All right. So anytime that this function runs, it's going to change that label, and it's going to write the word score, and then it's going to also write whatever number is being stored in memory. That way, my score will update when I change this variable in menu, and if I in memory. So if I change this variable, this will update it on the screen because it's not going to just print out a number; it's going to print out whatever is being stored in memory. And we actually there's a name for this when you combine regular text with a variable. Usually we say we're concatenating. All right, so we're concatenating this variable on the end of this text score. All right, so again, we're going to use this again and again and again anytime we need to update our score. So what are we going to do next? We're going to actually figure out how to get points. So right now, if I click on the mole, nothing happens. All right, So we're going to make it so that when we click on the mole, we get a point. So to do that, we're going to go to our image sprite. You're going to see that the image sprite has all sorts of events. All right, we can detect when the image sprite collides with something. We can detect when it's trying to be dragged. We can detect when it reaches the edge of the screen. We can detect if somebody flings it. We can detect if it's no longer colliding, whether somebody presses down on it, whether somebody lets up on it, or when it just gets touched. Now for our game, we're just going to use the touched one, but notice there are lots of other events, and we will use some of those as we move through the course. So we're going to get this when image sprite touched. And this is how we score points in our game. All right. So when the image sprite is touched, we're going to do a few different things. We're going to increase our score. So to increase our score, we have to change memory. So I'm going to get a set block. I'm going to say set score, and then I'm going to make it one bigger. So to make it one bigger, I'm going to get an addition block. I'm going to get the get block. So I'm saying get whatever score was, look in memory, see what score was, add 1 to it, and then resave that in memory. So if it was 5, it would retrieve the 5, add 1 to it, make it 6, and then save that 6 back into memory. All right, so this is going to update memory. Now remember, updating memory isn't the same as changing the screen. So to change the screen, I'm going to go to my procedures menu and use this update function. Actually, I meant to call it update score. I'm not sure why it just says update. Name doesn't matter, but I just meant to call it update score, so I'm going to change it. And now I have this block that says call update score. And I'm going to call that. Now, I also don't want somebody to be able to click really fast and get multiple points. So as soon as somebody clicks on the mole, I'm going to move it. All right. So again, instead of having to rewrite this code, I can just call move mole, and that'll make it so that the mole instantly moves as soon as I click it. All right. Now, if I go back to my game here, you're going to see that if I click on the mole, all right, my score went up and it instantly hopped to a new location. All right. So I clicked on it again, it moved. I clicked on it again, I get a point, and then it moves. Click on it again, I get a point, and it moves. So you can see that it's working, all right? It's changing memory. That memory is then being written to the screen, and then we're calling this function that moves our mole around the screen, all right? So there's one last thing that we're going to do, and then the lab is going to pick up with the rest of the app. So the last thing that we're going to do is just set up our reset button, because that's sort of helpful when you're testing and making sure things work. So the reset button is the only button in our app. So it's this button 1. I didn't rename it since it was the only one. I'm going to say when button 1 is clicked. And right now, the only thing that the reset button is going to do is put the score back to 0. All right, so I'm going to do the variable. I'm going to say set score. This time, instead of doing a calculation, I'm just going to set it to 0. And again, remember, setting it to 0 is not the same as updating the screen. So I'm going to take this handy procedure that I wrote, call update score, and I'm going to stick it in there. So again, you can see I'm using these things in multiple places. So instead of having to reproduce all of this code, I stick it inside of a function, and then I can just reuse it over and over. The other reason functions are nice is that if I decide to change this, maybe I want it to say, instead of score, I want it to say your score. I only have to change it in this one place versus having to change it again and again and again and again. So a lot of times kids just like to duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. The reason you don't want to duplicate is that if you decide to make a change, you then have to go change it in like 5 different spots. If I use a procedure or a function, I only have to change it once, and then all of the different places that I used it will automatically update. So anyways, that's another reason you want to use these. But that should be our reset button. So now when I hit reset, it sends the score back to 0, and and that's pretty much it. It just sends the score back to 0. Later, the reset button is going to have to do a little more, but for right now, it's just setting it back to 0, and then I can keep playing until I get bored and I don't want to play anymore. All right, so that's the intro. All right, that walks you through some of the new concepts, mostly the timer, which lets code repeat over and over and over again, in our case, once per second. And this idea of procedures, which lets you repeat code that you need to use again and again in your program. All right, so that's it for now. You're going to want to head over to the lab document now, take a look at it, and that will walk you through everything else that you need to do. So again, I hope this was helpful. Have a great day, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.